joining me today in the garden. I'm Liz Davey, and you're watching NCTV, Norfolk Community Cable. I'm in my herb garden today, and as you can see, it's still winter. We're in February, and it's early February, and we have snow, and most of all, we have ice, which is going to influence a bit of how we move around today, because I don't want to fall, and I don't want the cameraman to fall either. So we're going to follow along with what we usually do in the garden to look at it, but we'll alter our path a little bit. I'm in the herb garden and things are really quiet, and there really are no herbs. I could probably pick a little thyme if I got under the snow, if I really needed it, or some sage. There are some sage leaves that are still up and drying on the plants, and we could pick some of those. There's some sage over there, and a little thyme down in front. So I could pick a little, but probably I'll just use the dried herbs that I cut last year and dried. The herb garden is covered with oak leaves, which naturally fell, and there's still some on the tree right up here. And the oak leaves, as you can see on the tree, the ones that are still on the tree, they really don't mat down like the maple leaves, so they do make a pretty good winter mulch on something like the herb garden. In the coming days, we'll be raking them off, and we'll have chives come up, and that'll be probably our first herb that we can harvest fresh for the 2022 season. And then other things will start coming up, the perennials. Last year, before winter, I took out all of the annual herbs, so I have spaces left in the garden to plant more annual herbs this year. And some of those herbs I will start inside, and others I'll buy small plants and put them into the garden. The perennial herbs will come up as the weather warms, and the herb garden will be completely filled by June. Now let's move over to the perennial garden and see what's happening over there. You'll notice that the perennials in the perennial garden are still standing, and a lot of them even have the hoops still on them. Winter came a little faster than I anticipated. However, I do not cut down my perennials in the fall. The reason being is pollinators tend to use the stems of perennials as their winter home. And I do not use pesticides, and I try to encourage all the pollinators that I can by growing native plants. Many of these are native: asters, black-eyed Susans, and some of the others. And their stems, again, are winter homes for some of the pollinators, some of the native bees. Actually, honeybees are not a native bee. They are imported from Europe, but we have a lot of native pollinators, little bees and flies, and they tend to stay in these stalks. So I'll leave them standing until the temperature gets to be about 50 degrees regularly, and then I can clean out the garden. Right now, it is admittedly a mess, but I feel like I'm doing a good job encouraging the pollinators, and we should have a beautiful garden come spring, and it will get cleaned up, just not now, and we'll wait until probably about April. You'll notice the baskets in the garden. I still have baskets over some of my tender plants. Lavenders particularly don't like the freezing and thawing that we've been having, so I've put baskets of oak leaves over them, and the chrysanthemums as well. Those will come off probably in late March, early April, so that the plant can be cut back and start anew. Again, they don't like freezing and thawing. I've got my deer spray out, and with the snow you can come out and check for tracks and figure out what you've got walking through your garden, and then you'll know whether you need deer spray or something for rabbits. I've seen some rabbit tracks out here. This is supposed to help with rabbits as well, but I would be spraying things like azaleas, which the deer love to eat, and anything else that looks like it's been nibbled. Holly is another thing that deer will definitely go for. I haven't had as many deer this year. There's been a lot of growth around here, and new houses built and woodland taken out. Therefore, I think it's decreased the number of deer in my area because I really haven't seen as many. But I am careful to spray things with the deer spray. It's a organic type spray. It's primarily rotten eggs. It smells terrible, but the deer don't like it either, which is why I use it. And again, I'll just spray anything that is very tasty to deer, and that would be at this season hollies and azaleas. I wouldn't think they'd eat holly, but they do seem to like it, even though it has a spiny leaf. Again, you can see the green of some of the plants as we move along. These would be some early daisies, and they're green probably all year, and they will be early to bloom as well. Again, we will cut back everything once the weather warms up and it becomes spring. And now let's take a look at the vegetable garden and see what's going on there. Not much, but we check it out to see. The vegetable garden was left with some vegetables still in it. We used broccoli up until Thanksgiving. The remains of the plants are right here, and they will, of course, be taken out early in the spring once the ground is not frozen. I've started my brush pile. We do some burning in the garden. We have quite a bit of brush because we have a lot of trees and there are inevitably branches down. And this is a good reminder that the Norfolk Fire Department does issue burning permits, and they start issuing them January 15th up through May 1st. And so you can go online or go down to the fire station and get a burning permit. Open burning is not permitted without a permit, and you need to call the day that you do the burning in order to get permission. They do not allow burning if the wind is heavy, and they will let you know if it's okay to burn on any day that you wish to do it. We usually burn once or twice, a little bit, and then spread out some of the ashes in the garden. And so I'm starting my burn pile. I've got several of them around the garden that I'll be bringing over to actually burn. The other thing, I have numerous crops that are under straw. This row of straw covers parsley that grew last year. Parsley is a biennial, and that means that it grows 1 year for the foliage, and then the next year it comes up and it goes to seed. However, before it goes to seed, you can harvest quite a bit of parsley, and parsley is rather slow to grow during the season, so by saving your parsley from the year before, you'll have parsley a lot longer to harvest in the garden. I also planted in October a row of garlic, and that is on straw as well, and the garlic will start coming up in the spring as the weather warms. I have a row of strawberries that I planted last year, and the first year you plant strawberries of the type I planted, which are one picking of strawberries, a June harvest of strawberries. There are ever-growing strawberries as well. Mine, you just have one harvest in June, and those are covered with straw, but you had to pick off the blossoms last year. So I did not have much in the way of strawberries last year. I had to pick the blossoms off. I had a few old ones, but I replanted them, took off the blossoms, and this year I anticipate a nice crop of strawberries. They too are covered with straw in the garden, and that will be raked back as the weather clears. And then we'll put some fertilizer on all of these crops, and they'll be ready to go for the season. Pruning right now is a possibility, and certainly anytime you have broken limbs, you can prune them off if you have things that have been damaged by the snow and ice. But generally, you prune spring blooming things in the fall and fall blooming things in the spring. Have I got that right? I think so. You don't want to prune off the buds. But I can prune off blueberries, and this blueberry has a couple of very old stalks, and I can prune those off now before they start to grow, and we can add those to the burn pile. I'll go back in and get off the rest of it, and I may need my larger pruners. Blueberries do produce better if you keep the stalks that are growing to the new stalks, and hopefully by pruning back some of the old ones, new shoots will come up, and we'll get a little better harvest. We never get a whole lot of blueberries out of these 2 bushes. The birds seem to be able to get under any netting I put over them and help themselves. I usually get a couple handfuls, but that's okay. I enjoy having the berries in the garden. As far as other pruning goes, just beware that if you have spring blooming things, you really don't want to prune them now. And that means many of the things that you enjoy, forsythia and that sort of thing. I do have some forsythia. I'll be picking some of that soon to bring in the house to force so that I will have some bright yellow blossoms a little early as a bouquet in the house. We'll do that about next month. Other than that, the vegetable garden will just rest, and we will resume planting as soon as the ground can be worked, which will probably be about April. Now I'm going to go out and we will head to the backyard a little bit. I take in any terracotta pots for the winter, but I have several resin or fiberglass pots that stay out throughout the winter. In the summer, they'll have summer flowers in them, some annual blooms. And for Christmas, I like to dress them up with some greens that I've picked from my evergreens and some of the red twig dogwood and a few berries. These are frankly fake. I have real holly in here, and it had berries, but the birds have cleaned it out, as well as winterberry, and the birds again have enjoyed it all winter. So if I want any color right now in February, I have to rely on some that are not real. This is going to stay here until spring for one good reason. The stalks are frozen in, so there's no way I can move them out of the container until it thaws a little bit. And that will happen soon. I did have a basket that was on my porch up by the door, and that one I did put in the garden shed so that I can remove the greens from that a little earlier and perhaps get it ready for a spring decoration. But these will have to stay here until spring. Unfortunately, they still look pretty good, so we'll leave it alone and enjoy it. I did put a solar light in it this year, and it's been nice because the sun does shine on this area, and we have a nice solar light that lights up when it gets dark. Usually I put those in my window boxes along the side of the garage, so they'll kind of light up the path a little bit back there. Now let's head out to the backyard and see what's happening back there. I feed the birds, and we really enjoy watching them from inside. During the cold weather, they appreciate the food. And I have several feeders. I use different seed. This one is filled with sunflower seed. And in addition, I use these commercial blocks of suet or suet type material. And this feeder has little pockets for them. The woodpeckers absolutely love this, and I've had woodpeckers of several varieties and flickers that come to visit almost every day. My other feeder is more for birds that like to eat up top, and then I usually throw some seed out for those who are ground feeders. We've had a lot of birds, and it's been really fun to watch them. We have probably 3 or 4 pair of cardinals that come and visit every day. And it's interesting to note that different birds come at different times. It's almost like they have a clock. Normally we would be going out into the shade garden and down to my pond. Today we're not doing that because the path is treacherous with ice. It's starting to melt, but that just makes it worse underfoot. So we'll talk about it a little bit. And I have in the pond an ice melter. My fish stay in the pond all winter, and I have an ice melter there that keeps a hole in the ice, and that exhausts any gases in the pond. The fish produce what fish produce, and it causes some gases to form under the ice, and if they don't have a little space in it, it can kill the fish. Also just the normal vegetation that falls into the pond and then deteriorates, disintegrates, causes gases to form. And so we definitely need to leave a hole in the ice if you want to keep your fish in the pond all winter in this climate. I noticed as I came out, spring must be getting close because I have a few bulbs that are starting to come up right here. This bed will be cleared, and because it's so near the house and so near the brick patio, this little area always warms up first. And we will get some crocuses and daffodils starting to come up very early in the process in this particular area, which is also always a nice thing to see. But yes, we have some little bulbs already peeking through in the back, closest to the house. So we'll be looking for those in another month or so and welcoming spring as we start to clean up around here. And again, the birdseed gets raked up and vacuumed up actually with a shop vac, and things will start to look a little better as we go on. But now let's go inside and see what we can do to make some Valentine's decorations, work with some house plants, and do a little cooking with things that I've taken out of the freezer. Winter gives you a chance to do some work inside, and there's always something to do if you grow plants. Also, all the catalogs have come, and I would encourage you, if you want to plant seeds this year or order plants, to put your orders in now, because I have heard that seeds are going quickly on some favorite vegetables and flowers. So if you would like to place orders, be sure you get them in. There are many opportunities to order online or from the catalogs, and if you're on one list for one catalog from one garden supply center, you will probably get at least a dozen, if not more, catalogs from different places. So now's the time to place orders. In fact, it's starting to even get too late. People really got into gardening during COVID, and they are encouraged to start early this year, and they're ordering seeds. One of the things you can plant now, it's way too early to plant your tomatoes, but you could start doing some winter sowing. And I do quite a bit of winter sowing, and we even had a workshop on it with the Garden Club of Norfolk a couple weeks ago. And I'm going to show you how I do it. And I'm using milk jugs. And gallon milk jugs are preferable, but I have half gallons. I will say that I have tried quart jugs. They do not work well. They tend to fall over quite easily. But the half gallon works if you only want a few of something. So I'm going to poke holes in the bottom, and I'm using an ice pick. You can also use an awl or a screwdriver or a knife. It's important that you get holes in the top and the bottom. The top is for ventilation primarily, and the bottom is for drainage. And you need both in order to grow the plants. I'm also going to put one hole in about the middle and then use my kitchen shears. I have an old pair that I designate for gardening, and then I cut around the carton. And this makes a little mini greenhouse, and I leave about a ½ an inch as a hinge. And it's that simple. And then I can plant some seeds in it. And what I'll do is use a germinating soil, which I have dampened. And we're going to fill that fairly full with the germinating soil. Here. And I'm going to plant some purple coneflower seeds. This works extremely well for perennial plants that normally would grow outside. And also for very hardy vegetables can also be seeded this way now. And I'm just going to put a few of these purple coneflower seeds in. Purple coneflower is a native perennial. Butterflies love it. And I would like to grow a little more of it. So I've added a few seeds, and I'll cover them with just a little bit of soil. and press it down firmly. This soil is pretty damp. If it were not damp, I would also water it before I planted the seeds, but I dampened it. And then the important part is to add some labels, and I'm using popsicle sticks, and I've written echinacea on it, which is what purple coneflower is. And then I will close it up, and I'll label it again on the outside. And this time I think I'll call it purple coneflower. The next thing I need to do is use some duct tape to seal up the container. And you don't need to go around the whole container, but you just need to do enough sticky stuff to seal it. This will go right out in the snow, ice. You'll notice I don't have a cap on it, so it will get all the rain. When it rains, it'll get watered, and then I'll just forget about it. And sometime around April I'll look in, maybe even May, depending on what plant it is, and there will be a lot of green shoots that are coming up out of the jug. At that point I can open the jug and let it get some sun on warm days and close it up at night. Just cut the tape to do it. And then when the plants are large enough, you can transplant them into your garden. I'm doing another one right now. And this one's going to be broccoli. Broccoli does best if you can plant little plants to put in the garden. Seeds are pretty small, so I don't want to plant too many of them in here because they'll be very hard to separate if I do plant too many. So no more than about a dozen in this container. And again, I need to put some soil over the top. I have a little right here, and we'll get a little more out. And again, this is a germinating soil, which is a little finer than regular potting soil, although you can use a regular potting soil if it is not too coarse. And press them down well. And again, tape it shut. Put my label in that said broccoli. And I usually write down things in a little booklet too to know when I planted this broccoli and the coneflower. And I'll write broccoli on it. Sometimes the marker labels do come off or get weak, and you can't see them as well. So I'm going to put these two over here, and they will go out to the garden and join a few more that are out there near my vegetable garden, and then just forget about them until spring. It's really a great way to grow things. You can even grow tomatoes this way. Those you would start in April, not in February. And some of the other flowers that are more tender, you can grow in March. There's a list on the Garden Club of Norfolk website that shows which flowers you can plant now, which in March, and which vegetables and flowers and herbs that you can plant in April too. Now, last fall, before the garden season ended, I had a lot of annuals in containers. This is Coleus, and I took cuttings. I dipped the piece that I cut off the top of the plant pieces in rooting hormone, and then I added about 3 to each of these pots of compost. Now it's time to put them into individual pots. In fact, it's probably a little past time. And for this I will use a potting soil. And the potting soil drains a little better and is a little coarser. And so this plant will now become 3 plants. These will stay inside because they're a very tender plant. They can't go out until all danger of frost is finished, but I want to separate the roots. And add more soil around them. In fact, between now and the end of March, will be time to replant a number of houseplants. As spring starts coming and they start to wake up, it's a good time to prune them and replant any that you have that will be going out. Once we get to April and May, things get really busy outside, so if you can get some things done inside during this season, it's better. And now we have 3 plants from 1. I have one more to do, and that is this Amaryllis. This was an Amaryllis that I received as a gift. I'm going to try to get some of the soil off the sheet here. And this Amaryllis has finished blooming, so I'm going to cut it off. This particular one had a wax coating, and most people, I think, probably just throw these away once they're finished with them. It's unique in that you don't need to do anything with it. You don't have to water it. You just set it out and it blooms. Now I've got some foliage coming up out of the Amaryllis. And what I want to do is take off the wax. We'll take it off and discard it. They actually cut the roots off of these. But what I'm going to do is remove the wax and put this Amaryllis in a pot. Pot it right up. Incidentally, these will go in a plant tray later. And we want to leave the top part of the Amaryllis out just a little bit. A little bit more soil around it. And this is not going to bloom again this year. What I'll do is put it out into the garden once the weather warms up. And we'll let the foliage grow and keep it watered. And the foliage will give the bulb strength for another season of blooming. And by putting it outdoors, we can let it get a lot of good sun this summer, and we may well get another season of bloom from it. This was a very pretty red and white one, and I'd like to see it bloom again. At least it gives it a chance rather than just throwing it in the trash. And these plants will be watered and set into a tray so that they don't leak all over the floor. Now we're going to do a few crafty items, and I'm going to start with a couple decorations to go outside, and this is one to go out on my front door that's kind of weatherproof. The weather we've had lately has not been real conducive to much in the way of flowers, but I did spray paint a heart that I cut out of wood, and I added a wire hanger, just twisting the ends through a couple holes I drilled. And I'm going to use my hot glue gun and I glued some sticks together and painted them white. And I have plenty of sticks. Most of us around here, I think, do. And I'm going to glue those on, and then I'll glue another heart right in the middle of them. Very simple once you've cut your heart shape. And we'll let that dry and have an outdoor Valentine hanging decoration. Once you take some of the Christmas things down, it looks a little bare out there, and it's time to put up something else. I'm going to make another one for inside. And this time I'm going to use a twig wreath, and I'm going to use wire because I'll probably want to use the twig wreath again. So I don't want to glue anything to it really. So we'll use some of the green paddle wire. This is available at craft stores. And I'm going to just wire some of these berry twigs to it. These are our artificial berries, again. And mostly 2 pieces of wire will take care of it. And again, I might want to use this wreath for St. Patrick's Day or Easter or some other time, so. I already have put a little wire on so that I can hang the wreath. And we'll put these 2 in. The floral wire is very easy to use and twist. To hold things in place a little bit. One more piece. Have to make sure I have the ends. Then I have some sea lavender, and we'll put a little bit of that in too. This is one that's dried, so we've used artificial and dried. And I'll put a little bunch of that in each of these spots, again with another piece of wire. Actually, I want these down a little bit. I think I need another piece, 2. Sea lavender does grow as a perennial in our area, and it's nice to have some because then you can pick it and use it in arrangements. This one's coming loose. And the last thing I will add is a nice Valentine's bow. And again, wiring it in. So definitely this is a temporary wreath. You can remove the decorations and put on others of your choice. But we have 2 wreaths. And we did use some of the dried floral material. The last thing I want to show has very little to do with gardening. It's a candle, but I did use garden twine, so maybe that counts. And I wrapped it. I found out that hot glue does not stick to candles, but the twine sticks to itself. So you start by gluing the twine to itself and then wrap it around the candle. And then I'll finish it off. Pick a good spot here and add some hot glue again to it. And put just a little paper heart on it. Simple, easy, and just something cute for your Valentine's table, which doesn't take a lot of time. And again, that too is reversible. If you don't want a Valentine candle, you can remove the twine and use it for something else. Now it's time to go in the kitchen and do a little cooking and use up some of the things that we put in the freezer last summer. And we're going to add a quart of chicken broth. And that's a whole package of it. One can of diced tomatoes. And then I use the low salt, but we'll season it with some salt and pepper to taste. We'll add a little now and then possibly more later. The sausage does have some. And then a can of cannellini beans, which has been drained and rinsed. I always rinse canned beans. Sometimes the solution that they can them in is not very tasty. And some of the beans, they even add some sugar, which I really don't want in my soup. So now we're going to turn it up, bring it to a boil, and we're going to let this mixture simmer for about 20 minutes. Oh, forgot to add the sausage. We have to add that back into the pan. And this, again, has been just browned. It's Italian sausage, sweet Italian sausage. You could use hot if you prefer a hot soup. And you can use either bulk or links. If you use the links, you have to remove it from the casings, which is what I did. And then we'll add a few more ingredients a little bit later. But while the soup is cooking, doing it simmering, I'm going to work on a dessert. And I've made some pie pastry, and I'm going to make some little pastries, Valentine pastries. And I do need to go over and get some flour, which I forgot to bring over. I like to use a pastry cloth to roll any type of pastry. It holds the flour and it makes things very easy to roll. And I'm going to roll this out thin. It's pie dough. If you want to purchase pie dough or the pie crusts, you could use those as well. All you have to do is just spread them out and maybe roll them a little bit to get them quite thin, because you really want to get this thin. So we're going to do a little folding. And I'm going to turn my pastry, and you can see it's not sticking at all, which is why I like the pastry cloth. And the cloth is available at kitchen supply stores. And it usually comes with this cover for the rolling pin. And my grandmother used a cloth like this. My mother used a cloth like this, and I use a cloth like this. So I guess we found it worked quite well. The next thing I'm going to do is, I had a little envelope, tiny little card envelope, and I've opened it up and I'm going to use it as a pattern. And I'm going to set it on my dough and use a knife to cut around it because I'm going to make some little love letters. And you think of an envelope as maybe a rectangle, but it really is more of a flower type shape. And I'm going to scoot this up and put a baking sheet here. And I'll just do one for now, maybe a couple of these. We'll put it on the sheet. And then I had quite a bit of strawberries, frozen strawberries left in the freezer. And they were getting to the point where I needed to use them or do something with them. So I made some strawberry jam with them. And I'm going to use some of the jam and put it in my pastry. Just a teaspoon is enough because even then it may leak a little bit. And then I'll fold up this portion and this portion. And we've got a little love letter. And the last thing I want to do is brush it with a little cream. Kind of holds it together. And then I have a tiny little heart cutter. This is part of an hors d'oeuvre cutter set, but there are other small ones available. And if it doesn't come out of the cutter, I can use this. And then I'll put that right in the middle of my little pastry package. And let's do another one. I can cut another one out in the distance here. Again, if you have cookie cutters, you can just make hearts too and fill them later. But you can also, if you don't have a cookie cutter and you want a shape of some sort, just make a pattern and cut around it. This envelope is almost symmetrical, but not quite. It has one corner that's a little more pointed, and that would be the top of the envelope. And we'll put it on, and let's see, did we get that right? Yes. And then put some jam on it. And again, fold up the bottom first, and fold up the sides, and brush it with some cream. And then we can brush those little hearts with a little cream too. And sprinkle with a little sparkling sugar, or just plain sugar will work too. Give them a little sparkle. And then we'll bake these at 375 for 10 to 12 minutes, depending on your oven. And we'll have a little letter pastry, love letters. And this is what we get when we're finished. We get a little pastry, and expect the jam to leak a little bit, but that's all right. It will kind of spread it out so you get a little jam with every bite. And we'll have some more of those on the table. Another thing that I did was to make some biscuits to go with our soup, and you could use the canned biscuits as well, I'm sure. I made these from scratch. Biscuits are pretty easy, you know, if you have a basic recipe. And to get a little color, I brushed the top with an egg which had been beaten with some paprika. Paprika doesn't, the regular, not hot paprika, but just regular paprika will not give a great deal of flavor, but it does give some color, and that will be the bread that goes with our soup. And now maybe it's almost time that we can add some more ingredients to the soup. My husband always says that I should be finishing a dish before I go on to the next one. But I know that it doesn't work that way when you're cooking in the kitchen. Sometimes when something has to cook, you need to do something to fill the time while something else is just cooking on the stove, which is what I did here. I went ahead and I made our little dessert while the soup was cooking. If I had done one thing at a time, it would have taken a lot longer. And if you're getting a meal on the table, you really need to prioritize your time so that everything comes out at the end and you have all the elements of the meal together. Now this is simmering really good. We're going to let it simmer just a little longer to blend all those flavors, and then we have a few more additions. Now it's time to add some more things to the soup. It's been simmering for about 20 minutes. It's a nice little simmer, not quite a full boil, but just simmering. And what we want to add is a cup of kale. And this is kale that I froze from my garden. And the kale from the garden does very well, and I'm adding at least a cup. I could even add a little more. Open another package. But kale freezes pretty well. It would have been better if I'd added it frozen. It did thaw while it was waiting here. But we'll add the kale, which gives a lot of nutrition to a soup, and half a cup of heavy cream, which makes it tasty, and 1 tablespoon of apple cider vinegar, which just brightens up the flavor. I need to get the kale off my fingers. And we'll stir that around a little bit. And heat it up. And I'll see you in the dining room for our Valentine-themed supper. Here we are with our Valentine-themed supper. We have our soup, and we can add a little Parmesan cheese to that on top as we serve it, as a little garnish. It's Italian flavors. Our biscuits to go with the soup. Soup and bread are always a good meal. And then for dessert, we have our love letters, our little Valentine strawberry pastries. I wish you all a very happy Valentine's Day. If it's past by the time you see this, I hope it was very nice. I'm Liz Davey, and you've been watching A Walk in the Garden on NCTV, Norfolk Community Cable. We'll see you again next month in the garden and in the kitchen. I'm going to make some dog cookies. Buddy had a birthday. You've probably noticed Buddy following me around outside. He's my dog. He's a golden doodle who, in his spare time, visits nursing homes and sometimes reads to the kids at the library. Actually, they read to him. And he enjoys his work, but he also enjoys his leisure, and he likes cookies. So I'm going to make him some homemade dog cookies, and these are peanut butter cookies. There are lots of recipes for dog cookies, so if you have a dog, I'm sure you can find one with ingredients that they will like. I'm going to start with a cup of whole wheat flour, a half a cup of oatmeal, and 1/4 cup of dry milk. And a tablespoon of parsley for a little seasoning. You can add a little salt if you wish, but I don't really think it needs it. And to this I'm going to add a 1/2 cup of peanut butter. Now if you buy peanut butter, make sure it does not contain the ingredient xylitol. That's spelled with an X. And xylitol is an artificial sweetener that's used sometimes in peanut butter. It's also used in sugarless gum and mints. And it also is very poisonous for dogs. So you really don't want anywhere, if you have a dog, you don't want it anywhere in the house. So be sure to check the label of your peanut butter and make sure it does not contain xylitol if you're going to use it as a treat for your dog. A lot of people put peanut butter in the Kong toys for their dog to lick out of the inside of the toy, or some of the other educational toys. But make sure you don't use the low-fat peanut butter is usually, or the low-calorie peanut butter is usually, or light peanut butter. It's usually the one that contains the xylitol. But just check the ingredients to make sure it isn't in there. You don't want to make cookies that are poison to your dog. And I'll add 1 egg and about 1/4 cup of water. This will vary depending on how humid the weather is, and you want to make it a firm dough that you are going to be able to roll. And it'll probably take 1/4 cup or perhaps a little more. So I'll just add a little more. The next step is to just gather it up. And I will put it on my pastry cloth, which will obviously get a bath after I've made these dog cookies. These pastry cloths and rolling pin covers are very easily washed. Move this over here, and we'll roll this out. About 1/4 inch thick. And I have a variety. Having had many dogs over the years, I have a variety of dog bone cutters. I'm going to make the larger ones today. We can always break them in half for treats. One of these is going to be a good hearty treat, so maybe half would even be better. And I'll put these onto my parchment lined baking sheet. They aren't going to rise up at all. We have nothing in there that would leaven them. No baking powder, no baking soda, no yeast. Although some recipes do call for something like that. This one does not. This is a very simple recipe. And we can re-roll the scrap. Again, the consistency of this is kind of like Play-Doh. So it's fairly easy to work with. Might be a good summer project for the kids. A little too thick. I want to try to get them all about the same thickness. If you don't have a dog bone cutter, you can just roll this into little balls and then flatten them out and make actual dog cookies. And put those on your baking sheet. So we'll do a few of those too. And we can move them closer together. Probably get the whole thing on one sheet. There, we have all our dog cookies formed. And now we'll put this into the oven at 300 degrees for probably 40 minutes to an hour. You want them to be dark brown and also very crispy when you take them out. You want them completely dry. Even so, I will probably store the finished cookies either in the refrigerator or the freezer and take them out a few at a time to give to my dog. And here they are, all nice and crisp from the oven. And we can even tie them together and make a nice little gift if you have a friend with a dog that you'd like to share them with. And that pretty much concludes our show for today. I think my friend would like one. Buddy. Would you like a cookie? Yeah. Up. Come on, sit up. Smile. Yeah. Yep. Off he goes with his cookie. I'm Liz Davey. You've been watching A Walk in the Garden on NCTV.